Mahler is the author of The Challenge, How a Maverick Navy Officer and a Young Law Professor Risked Their Careers to Defend the Constitution, and They Won. Jonathan, welcome to the Young Turks.
Thanks for having me. That was some rant there.
Yeah, I get worked up. I'm not playing. All right, so tell us what the essence of this book is, Jonathan.
Sure. I mean, basically, this is the story of a Navy lawyer, a Navy officer, a JAG lawyer, and a young law professor at Georgetown who found themselves defending Osama bin Laden's driver on Guantanamo Bay a number of years ago, kind of in the early years of the Bush administration. And at the time, bin Laden's driver, Salam Hamdan was his name, was to be tried before a military tribunal on Guantanamo Bay, these sort of special courts that the president set up in the aftermath of 9/11. These guys, this Navy officer and this Georgetown law professor, thought these trials were unfair, that they were kangaroo courts. They filed a lawsuit against the President of the United States on behalf of this detainee, this driver for bin Laden. The case went all the way to the Supreme Court, and they won at the Supreme Court in a now very famous case known as Hamdan v. Rumsfeld. So the book sort of tells the story of the relationship between these two lawyers, the relationship between these lawyers and Hamdan himself, this Yemeni man who worked for bin Laden for many years, and then is kind of a legal thriller that sort of tells the story of the case as it makes its way through the courts and up to the Supreme Court.
Jonathan, tell us the names of those two officers.
Sure. Charlie Swift, Lieutenant Commander Charles Swift, is the JAG, and Neil Katyal is the Georgetown law professor who actually is now on leave in the Obama administration.
All right. Now, I wrote an article about Charlie Swift a long time ago, and I called him an absolute American hero.
Yes.
Because he fought for the American justice system and he believes in it.
That's right.
And so tell the audience what happens to heroes in America.
Sure. He was not promoted and was therefore essentially kicked out of the military. He had for several years kind of zealously pursued this lawsuit and had zealously defended bin Laden's driver Hamdan, and he had done so, not only because of he felt it was his duty as a lawyer to zealously defend his client, but also because he thought it was his duty as an officer of the United States military to defend the U.S. Constitution, which he felt his commander-in-chief, President Bush, was violating by trying to try his client Hamdan before these unfair trials. So he had really fought on principle. He fought for Hamdan on principle, but was ultimately kicked out of the military.
So let me get this right. He's a military lawyer. Not only does he win his case, he takes it all the way to the Supreme Court and wins a Supreme Court decision, a landmark decision.
Yeah.
Is it possible for a lawyer to do a better job?
No. This is, and what we're not even mentioning is the fact that, his client was an employee of Osama bin Laden, had been on Guantanamo Bay for years, where there was a very powerful kind of radical element, where there was a great deal of pressure to fire your American lawyer. So not only did they successfully bring this case through the courts and argue against the United States government and win at the Supreme Court, he had to maintain a relationship with a guy who had been interrogated dozens of times by men in fact really tortured at times by men in military uniforms, and yet he had to, as a military officer and lawyer, had to maintain a relationship, build a relationship of trust with this guy.
Now, doesn't it show you, if you fire a guy who clearly has done as good a job as literally as possible, as we just explained, it is impossible for a lawyer to do a better job.
That's
and
right.
If you still fire him, doesn't that say that you never really had an intention to do a fair process at all? And that if any other lawyer gets it in their head to fight really hard for their clients as they're supposed to, and to defend the U.S. Constitution as they're supposed to, that they can look forward to getting fired?
That is pretty clearly the message that the government has said that the military was sending in not promoting him. Having said that, fortunately there are other lawyers like him who are members of the military who are defending these guys, and they also are doing so zealously. And there are also pro bono lawyers, people at corporate law firms who are firms that bill thousands of dollars an hour are defending detainees for free. So it's true, but fortunately it hasn't been too much of a deterrent.
Now, Jonathan, if that's what you do and you get fired, what do you do to get a promotion?
As Swift himself put it once, you roll over and have your belly scratched.
And that's what we saw in the Bush administration over and over again. There's two other stories in today's rundown where they cherry pick, like Kyle Dusty Fago, the number 3 guy at the CIA. They just picked him up out of nowhere because he was willing to do their bidding. Yesterday we told the story of the 2 so-called doctors that they found to start the torture program because they're the ones that were willing to do the torture.
That's right.
And Charlie Swift didn't play ball. So let's give a little bit of a conclusion to this story. We know Neil Katyal is now in the Obama administration, so that has a bit of a happy ending.
Yep.
What's Charlie Swift's situation?
Well, Swift, after he left the military, he, and I also tell this story in the book. I mean, the not surprisingly, this case in defending Hamdan, spending a week at a time every month on Guantanamo put a great strain on his marriage, and so his marriage split up at the end of sort of towards the end of the case. And then he was subsequently kicked out of the military. And, for a while he was really kind of at sea. I mean, here's a guy who'd been in the military his whole life, ever since he'd gone to the U.S. Naval Academy for college and had really never left. And so he was sort of at sea and not sure what he was going to do. And he did sort of eventually find his way out to Seattle, and he has his own kind of private practice that he's trying to get started out there. So
I think if there's a big law firm in the country, could they not use the guy who won one of the most important Supreme Court decisions, certainly of the last 10 years?
You would think so.
Could they not use a guy like that?
You would think so.
God, it's this country, man, the way that it crushes the good guys and rewards the bad guys is just absolutely discouraging. All right, Jonathan Mahler's written a really interesting book called The Challenge, How a Maverick Navy Officer and a Young Law Professor Risked Their Careers to Defend the Constitution, and they won. Well, they won the case, at least. Jonathan, thank you so much for joining us. Really
My
appreciate
pleasure.
it.
Thanks for having me.